Hey Terrell, how are you?
Good, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing all right. Thanks for coming on. And for people who don't know who you are and the work that you do, your full name is Terrell Baldock, and you are a women's health and strength coach, helping women get sweaty and lift. And you also focus on public health.
Mm.
So, what type of women are coming to you? First, first question.
Yeah, and that's a great question. So typically the women that come to me, they're experiencing some sort of pelvic floor dysfunction. So that could be pelvic organ prolapse, where one or more of the pelvic organs bulge through the vaginal wall. Some of my clients come to me with stress urinary incontinence. So that's when they pee unintentionally. So when they're laughing, sneezing, coughing, or even during their workouts. And I also work with a lot of women that experience pain within the pelvic floor. And what's interesting is that I work with women of all ages and stages. So I've worked with postpartum moms, so women who have recently given birth. I've worked with women, or I work with women, over 40. I've worked with recreational and professional athletes. So, a broad spectrum, I guess, of people that I work with, but mainly focusing in on that pelvic health piece with strength and conditioning.
Okay. I, it seems to me, and I'm a pleasure and orgasm coach. So of course I'm very interested in the things that our pelvic floor does. But it seems to me generally we have a pretty big lack of education in our society around women's reproductive system, genitalia, pleasure, all of that rolled into sort of one, in my opinion, really an enraging ball. Uh, and so I wonder, do women experience pelvic floor dysfunction and prolapse and not even know sometimes that they have a condition?
Yeah, and it's common that most women don't know that there's anything going on at all. They just feel like this is normal or that their symptoms are normal. But with the case of prolapse, some women don't even feel symptoms, right? So they may have something, and we call it an asymptomatic prolapse. So, yeah, there's a lot of times where women don't know that they're experiencing something, or they don't know that it's something that's treatable.
And so how does this sort of show up in the gym? I mean, I confess that once or twice almost having peed myself while deadlifting,
Mhm.
but I think it was just, I don't know. I mean, I don't think I have any sort of dysfunction, but chugging a lot of water and then I go to,
Yeah.
I was like, oh my God, I don't know if I want to pee or throw up. What's happening?
Yeah. Yeah. So that would be something like pressure management a lot of the time. So what's interesting is that the pelvic floor isn't always to blame. We like to blame it, but it isn't always to blame. Sometimes, yeah, if you are working out, for example, and you feel like you are going to lose control of your bladder, you're going to pee yourself. Um, that may be intra-abdominal pressure. And what's really interesting, so intra-abdominal pressure is air in your belly. It's just the air in your belly that we use to stabilize your spine with heavier lifts, but it is used, throughout movement, right? So it's not anything that we can avoid. We actually need intra-abdominal pressure. But what tends to happen, and this is probably what you'll find really interesting, is that, okay, so we'll just pretend that this is the vagina here. So what happens is that when we're lifting or we're working really hard, that intra-abdominal pressure, that air in the belly is pushing down onto the pelvic floor. But what it's also doing is pushing down on your bladder. So what
Mm.
can happen then is that those muscles can't function because they've got that pressure pushing downward on it. And sometimes that can result in leaking with workouts. Um, but what I commonly see with that, with the intra-abdominal pressure, is what we call a hypertonic pelvic floor or an overly tight pelvic floor. And what happens here is that for some women, again, when they push down or that intra-abdominal pressure is pushing down, they don't have enough give in their pelvic floor, so their pelvic floor can't relax and contract. It's in that state of contraction. So when it's like this, again, those pelvic floor organs can't move and shift with the pelvic floor. So when that air is being pushed down onto the pelvic floor and all of those organs, the pelvic floor can give, I hate to say give out, but that's how many women find that they lose control, or that's why they lose control of their bladder. So it could be a couple of things. It could be both of those. So those are some things, yeah, if you're leaking when you're working out, that's one thing to kind of consider. It's the intra-abdominal pressure piece and the pelvic floor function piece.
So what kind of training can women do to, like, do you work with them to specifically train the pelvic floor, or is your work sort of about how to support them getting back to the gym and doing lifting while managing the pelvic floor conditions?
Yeah, so that's exactly what I do. So I help my clients get back to whatever their preferred method of training is. So if it's CrossFit, powerlifting, boot camps, jazzercise, whatever it is, basically what we're doing is we're starting with, bringing awareness to the pelvic floor. A lot of women, and you may have seen this yourself, we're just not connected to that part of our body. And what I help women do is bring that connection back or to their body, because the interesting thing is that the pelvic floor needs to move. So I'm teaching them how to use their pelvic floor muscles with exercise, bringing awareness to those muscles. And really, and then progressing them, moving them down the line so that they can return to impact or lose weight or improve performance or whatever it is their goals are.
Yeah, I've done a little bit of jade egg training. One
Mm-hmm.
of the first things in one of the first lessons was being taken through like articulating all of the muscles like down through the pelvic floor, the anus. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
I was quite surprised that how disconnected I was until I tried to focus and start to work on seeing like, can I articulate these muscles, or am I just like flexing my whole pelvic like
Mm-hmm.
all the way up? So you can train it though, right? Like you can,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, yeah. And your pelvic floor is just like any other muscle group, right? Like it can be trained to, relax, contract. And it really is like a mind-body connection, right? Like we have to really kind of, and for a lot of women who feel disconnected, it might take a little bit longer for them to reach that point. But what I do with my clients is then, so I'm sure you know what a Kegel is. So that's kind of where we start, just to bring awareness there. Now, if they're really struggling with bringing awareness or getting that feedback, then yeah, something like a jade egg can be helpful for that. I've had clients instruct clients to use their fingers or, even like their partner's penis, just to get that mind-body connection going. And then what we work on is training the automaticity of the pelvic floor, because your pelvic floor is supposed to move when you move, whether it's, through exercise, walking, or even in sex, like it's supposed to move. And if it's not moving, then what can we do to introduce movement back? So we start there, and then with that Kegel, or I like to, well, we call it pelvic floor contraction, but most people know it as a Kegel. And I will then introduce it to introduce a Kegel with movement and timing it with movement. So for example, if we were working together, I would have you do a glute bridge and coordinate a Kegel with a glute bridge. And then to progress you, I would have you then do a body weight squat and then maybe a loaded squat, just to really train that coordination piece with the pelvic floor and the movement. Because even a lot of women, myself included, have that backwards, right? So yeah, lots that goes into it. But yeah, there's like a general idea of how I move clients from the floor to higher impact training.
And it seems that if you are working on training your pelvic floor to, it jumped out at me that you were talking about that, I can't remember your exact words, but almost like a lack of flexibility, ability to move.
Mhm.
And it seems if you train that and are able to add back in some of that flexibility, that's going to translate to more pleasurable sex.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting. Like I don't coach sex. I'm not, a coach in that realm, but I've had clients come to me and like, what did you do to me? Because I just had. And it's, yeah, bringing awareness, breathing into those muscles, right? So a lot of what I do translates to the bedroom, which a lot of women are very pleasantly surprised to experience.
Yeah. And it's, you talk about that Kegel in terms of like training. And when I talk about the Kegel inside of like touchless orgasm is one thing that I love to teach as a, put aside all the external sources of pleasure. And it's that mind body connection, like looking inside, that sensitivity, like what can I feel inside of my vagina, my clitoris, my anus, and using Kegels or those contractions as a way to connect with that pleasure. So
Mhm.
it seems like there's like a really beautiful marriage going on there between the strength and the pleasure.
Oh, totally is. And what's interesting is, there's also the confidence piece that goes into it, right? Like when we feel strong in our bodies, we want to connect with the people, our partners,
Yeah.
around us, right? So it I like I am not obviously your typical personal trainer or strength coach, like I really focus in on the overall health, and intimacy and sex is such a big part of that, and it's so missed, in women's health in general. So, it's really interesting to see the transition of my clients who, feel broken, they feel lost. They want that connection. And just with some guidance and some, gentle coaching through that, they're finding that, yeah, like their intimacy is improving and they're enjoying it more. And it doesn't feel like a big chore to them, or they don't feel like they're letting their partners down. Cause that's also a big part of,
Yeah. Yeah.
some of the things that I see as well.
Yeah. And you were talking about strength, and I truly believe that our pleasure is a form of strength and power.
Mm.
So, and exactly what you said, it comes back to that confidence. Like if you can connect with your physical strength and you can connect with your pleasure, like it all grows outward from there. You're able to connect with your partner again. You're able to, maybe forge or rebuild some of those mental connections. And that, like you said, I think a lot of women sometimes have the experience of feeling like they let their partner down. And I think if we pay more attention to the pelvic floor, both from the strength aspect that you work with, and I almost think of what I do as like the opposite of strength. Like
Mm.
we're not, I mean, I do love the jade egg, but when I'm teaching touchless orgasm, which like I said is kind of its own thing, we're finding that strength inside, we're finding that suppleness,
Mhm.
we're finding that connection, and it's but we're leaving aside the sweating. It's like a receptive, like
Mhm.
rediscovering what's there, and I find it, yeah, really powerful practice. And I find,
Um,
since I've been doing this work for myself from a pleasure aspect, I'm much more aware of what's happening in my vagina. And I do
mhm.
notice when I go to the gym, like certain exercises, like definitely like I'm like, oh, hello, pussy. Like you're alive
Yeah.
for the workout this morning. Okay, great. Like,
Yep.
It's really interesting how it like it all stems from that core, really.
Well, and it's funny that you say core because your pelvic floor is a part of a deep core system. So, if I'm not sure how you coach the touchless orgasm, but for me, what I'm doing is I'm really helping my clients breathe into their pelvic floor, right? So I'm sure there's a lot of crossover with that,
We do
right?
the same
Breathing
thing.
into that. But what's interesting is that, yeah, so your pelvic floor is a part of your core and it's made up of your diaphragm, your lower back, or the muscles in your lower back, your pelvic floor, and your TVA, your transverse abs. So, when all of those muscles are working in alignment, then and pleasure becomes, I don't want to say easier. I'm trying
Almost
to find,
more accessible.
yes, accessible. Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Um, so are there any tips or suggestions you have for women to prevent prolapse or dysfunction?
Um, so unfortunately, we don't know if we can prevent it,
Really?
right? But what we can do is we can manage it. And the first thing I suggest is, bringing your breathing into alignment. So I have what I call the training for lady parts method.
Yep.
Yeah. And it's ABCKV. So it starts with alignment. So, making sure that your posture is in a neutral alignment, breathing, because we want that descent of the pelvic floor and the diaphragm, right? So we want to make sure that our breathing is in alignment with um, our coordination and coordinating that with movement. So we want to coordinate alignment breathing with the coordination of movement. So when I mentioned like the Kegel and the glute bridge or body weight squat, that's how we start working on the coordination piece. Kegels. This is an individual thing because not all women need Kegels, or not all women should be doing them. So going back to the hypertonic or the overly tight pelvic floor that I mentioned earlier, if we add more contractions on that,
Mm.
things can go the other way, right? So those muscles are just going to get tighter. So what we need to do is introduce that movement piece in there before adding in the Kegel. Um, and then a variation. So in terms of exercise, finding an exercise that does work or finding a starting point that does work for you. So if you are somebody that has, a dysfunction and you're experiencing symptoms, what can we do to align things first and then get the pelvic floor working as it's supposed to? So following that training for lady parts thing, I wish I had like a more creative like acronym for it, but that's just what it is.
Yeah.
But even just starting there can be really helpful. And if anybody wants my training for lady parts method, I have a video on YouTube and it's totally free.
Yeah, and we can link everything below for everybody. So if they want to
Awesome.
take a look at your work and get more information, they can do that in the description box.
Awesome.
So what's the one biggest thing you would say to women who are watching this video? One biggest takeaway you want them to know about their pelvic strength and health?
You have hope. It's not over for you. You know, so many women feel, as I said, broken through this process or broken through this journey. And, they go to healthcare providers, they go to, they're actively looking for help, but a lot of the times they're dismissed because, they're a woman or these things are all in their head and things like that, right? And there really are people, like myself and, so many other coaches who are so passionate about helping women overcome these dysfunctions. There's even pelvic floor physical therapy if you're from the US, physiotherapy if you're in Canada. Um, So there is a lot more out there and a lot more help and a lot more support than there was even just a few years ago. So don't give up, on yourself, whether it's, you want to get back into fitness or you just want to feel confident and sexy, you have that hope.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing. Like I said, we'll put everything in the description box below. Make sure you check out Terrell's work. I've taken a look at it myself and found lots of things to bolster my own practice and fitness routines. So don't miss that. And thanks everyone for watching.